Okay. As with everything that we do at the department, we always want to ground the work that we do in our Best for All mission, setting all students on a path to success in Tennessee through our three pillars of first, providing high quality academics, second, meeting the academic and non-academic needs of students in their career pathways, and third, supporting teachers and school leaders across Tennessee. So thank you all for the tremendous work you do as charter school leaders in our state and providing high quality options for our families. Like I mentioned before, we've combined two webinars into one. And so first we are going to discuss the charter school annual report, including the why behind the reporting, the requirements for reporting, submission, and the content included, as well as some updates for this school year. And then there'll be an opportunity for questions on that first section. Then we'll transition to the charter agreement amendment process, including the requirements for submission and the content. We'll also go over the review and appeals processes and updates for this current school year, as well as additional time for questions at the end. If you did not submit a letter of intent and do not plan on submitting an application for the amendment this fall, I still encourage you to stay through the end because the information is relevant both for the spring deadline as well as if you need to submit an emergency petition throughout the year. So the information will be useful even if you are not currently applying for an amendment this fall. So first, let's begin by grounding ourselves in the why of reporting. I know personally that when I worked in charter schools as a middle school principal, I often felt like anytime I got a request from the district or the state or federal government, it felt like busy work or just one more action item on my ever-growing to-do list. But I really believe that this is a meaningful and useful report. The Charter School Annual Report is a central document that supports charter school autonomy and innovation by providing them a way to essentially just brag about the amazing work that you are doing, but also build and make a case for how you are meeting or exceeding the metrics outlined in your charter agreement. So is it a state requirement? Yes, as outlined in the Tennessee statute listed here, but it also provides a number of other great opportunities. So first, it provides an opportunity to your charter governing board to synthesize and reflect on the progress that you've made towards the goals established in your charter agreement. Second, it really helps charter schools gauge the likelihood of your charter renewal. So each charter contract is set at 10 years of operation. You can think of the annual report as that check and building of evidence to support the case of your renewal each year leading up to that. Third, the report helps authorizers provide better oversight of their schools, which is a key component of the role that they play. And especially when they manage large portfolio of charter schools, these reports offer a lot of information packed into a small report. Fourth, your report informs other reports that are created to your benefit by the authorizer and the state. And then finally, the report provides information and transparency to key stakeholders in your charter school communities. That includes parents and other community members. So as you're creating your reports each year, they should be written with these ideas in mind. We know that the report is required by state statute, but what does the statute actually say? The language is pretty straightforward. Essentially, the charter school's annual report should include three main components. So first, the progress of the public charter school towards achieving the goals outlined in your charter agreement. Second, financial records of the public charter school, including revenues and expenditures. And third, a detailed accounting, including the amounts and sources of all funds received by the public charter school. So the questions in the guidance document that was shared are designed to support meeting this requirement. Annual reports are due to the authorizer and department no later than 5 p.m. Central on October 1, 2021. Charter schools should complete all the questions and chart found in the guidance document for the document to be considered complete. The annual report should be submitted as a PDF document to the department at charter.schools@tn.gov. When you look on page 3 of the guidance document, it explains all these requirements, as well as additional requirements on what to put in the subject line of the email, how to name the file, all of that information. The total length of the annual report should not exceed 20 pages. This excludes any attachments that you include, and the content should be easily identifiable through how you organize the report. So for example, using clear headings. Finally, please check with your authorizer regarding their requirements for submission of the annual report.
And I just wanted to add a little bit here, Nate, if I might. It may seem silly that we have naming conventions for files and that sort of thing, but if you think about it, we've got 116 charter schools submitting these reports, and the time it takes to rename and save them can really take up a lot of time, as you can imagine. So that's why we ask you to please follow the naming convention for the files and any attachments that you would include.
Absolutely. Thank you for adding that, Judy. I'll also add that it makes it easier to search the email when we're if there's someone reports that they've submitted one and we can't find it. If you use those naming conventions, it makes it much easier to pull it up and find it quickly to confirm that you submitted it on time. Great. So when you start reviewing the guidance document, you'll see that the report is divided into 3 components. So there's first a cover page, then there's the introduction to the school, and then finally the school progress report indicators. So the cover page will include your school name, address, contact information, and the date of the report. Then the introduction, there's actually a template that you'll use, and so you'll just complete the empty cells in that template and put it into your document. Finally, the school progress report indicators is where the bulk of the report lies, and that is where you respond to the prompts focusing on the academic, operational, and financial indicators of the school for the prior school year. Just a reminder, in addition to answering all of the questions in the indicators sections 1, 2, and 3, do pay special attention to the additional requirements, including the board and school leadership rosters located in Appendix A, the student attrition information table, which is in Appendix B, and then Section 3E requires you to attach a copy of the most recent annual audit for the school. And then question 3F is dependent upon 3E. So if there are findings in your audit, then you'll need to address them in 3F. For the 2020-2021 charter school annual report, the biggest changes include the deadline. So I do want to flag that again. I know we mentioned this in the newsletter and through emails, but I just want to make sure it's clear that this year's deadline is October 1st. And we set these deadlines based on when subsequent deadlines are for who needs these reports. So in this case, the annual authorizer report is based on your charter school reports. And so we provide enough time between the deadline for the authorizer report backwards plan from that. Second, while the questions and requirements from last year's report remain the same, there is an additional question in each section. So if you've already started working on this report, that's great. You can keep all the work that you've already done. Just go back and look at the most updated report that's on the guidance document that's on the website, because there's one section, one additional question in each section that you'll need to add. And we're going to go over each of those questions right now. So first, in the school academic performance section, question B, it says to explain how the school adjusted instruction during the 2020-21 school year due to closures necessitated by COVID-19. What methods worked best? Identify specific challenges to the instructional model and how they were addressed. So again, as a former middle school principal, I love this question because we obviously are constantly looking at our academic data to see the progress of our school. But when something happens like last year, where for all the our hard work that we've done, something happens beyond our control, this really provides an opportunity to explain and provide additional support to our academic performance in lieu of what happened last year with the school closure. So that question was added to help address that concern from this past school year. Next, in Section 2, School Operations, question C, identify the number of school days that your students attended school in person. fully remotely, and in a hybrid manner. Provide a narrative as needed to explain these categories. So again, here, we know that last year schools, depending on where you were located and district-wise and across the state, everyone was running different schedules on when students were in school. And so this is an opportunity to clarify when looking at the whole 180 days across the year, how much of that was in person, how much of that was remote, how much of it was a hybrid model. That will help us as we're reviewing these to really get a better idea of the program that was operated last year, given the COVID-19 conditions. And then as needed, just any narrative you want to include is fine to include there as well.
And I'd like to jump in here, Nate. I think different schools have defined hybrid in different manners, and that's why we said please provide a narrative as necessary to explain these categories. Some schools defined hybrid as having some students in person and some students remote. Some schools defined it as all students coming in some of the day, but being remote some of the day. So we just want to know, if you're talking about the hybrid manner, what did that mean for your school? Explain and describe what that is. So that we're very clear.
Great, thank you. And then finally, the last new question that was added is in section 3 for school finance, and it asks to identify the total amount and percentage of the annual budget expended upon facilities. This includes renovations and improvements, maintenance and repairs, and lease or mortgage payments. Separately, identify the total amount of these expenditures that were used to prevent, prepare for, or respond to COVID-19. And again, this question I think is probably my, I would say we'd say favorite, but the one that I think is most crucial that we added this past year, and that is because we just were awarded a large sum of money from the governor and from our General Assembly, both this year and then into future years. And that is going to go to benefit charter schools and their facilities. So this question is going to provide a lot of useful information and data as Judy and I determine how to best use and allocate those funds. We want a better picture of, in general, what percent or how much of our schools are needing to deter funds that could go to instruction, potentially to their facilities, and then also to differentiate the typical spending in a typical year compared to what might have been spent last year due to COVID-19. Anything that you want to add on this new question, Judy?
Yeah, no, I think this is just kind of a result of this past year and all the influx of funding and the allowability to use it for facilities. So we're just trying to find out here, like, how much was used on your facilities, especially as we have a facility fund coming up in the next year that the legislature approved. And so it's more of a kind of interest, but to see how those funds were used and if they were used on facilities. So we appreciate you providing that additional information.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, well, that takes us to the end of the first section on the charter school annual report. I'm going to pause now and address questions y'all may have. And I'm going to start with a question that was sent in the chat box. And it just says, what data points do we use for the quantitative section underneath academic performance? And so this past year, there was state testing data, so you'll want to include relevant Teen Ready data, since that was made available. But specifically looking at what within your charter agreement, the assessments that you mentioned that you're going to be using to support your goals would be where you want to look for what data you want to include in the academic performance section. Anything that you want to add to that question, Judy?
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. I mean, we're interested in what data you have, whether that is state testing data, internal assessment data, any kind of way that you are measuring academic performance would be helpful.
Great. Another question we had is under the facility question, do you want an amount of fixed capital repairs and renovations versus non-fixed? So plexiglass desk shields. I think that is up to you how you want to organize that information. Certainly differentiating between what was COVID related versus what would be typical facilities cost is most crucial for us to understand to paint a better, more accurate picture of what charter schools have to pay in facilities funds in terms of if you want to report that as fixed and not fixed, you can also include that as well. Judy, anything you want to add there?
No, I think you addressed that perfectly. That's exactly what we want.
Great. Next, do the items included in appendices A and B count toward the 20-page limit? The answer is no. So the appendices, those charts that you have to fill out, are included as attachments, and so they do not count against your 20-page limit if you include them at the back. If you want to include them within your report, then it might bump down your page limit, but if you leave them as appendices at the end of your report, they would be included as attachments. And then the narrative response using that data can be left for the main section of your report. Next, for schools in year 2 that will not have completed a year 1 audit by 10/1, should that just be noted in the report? Should we follow up offline? Judy, do you have an answer to that question if they don't yet have annual report?
Yeah, I think we'll follow up offline on that one.
Perfect. Other questions? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next section. If you do think of a question on the annual report, then feel free to save it till the end, and we'll have another opportunity to go over questions. So like I said, we're going to jump to our second section for this webinar, which is focusing on the Charter Agreement Amendment application. And so we're going to do that by first doing an overview of the Charter Agreement Amendment process, looking at the requirements for its submission as well as the content. We'll discuss the review and appeals processes, and then any updates that are in that revised document that was posted online. So what is the Charter Agreement Amendment process? When you become a charter school, you sign a charter agreement with the authorizer, and that charter agreement is good for 10 years of operation. And so the Charter Agreement Amendment process provides an opportunity for the charter school governing body to amend its charter agreement with the authorizer before the end of that 10-year period. And so it's a way to go back, and if something needs to change that was originally approved, to make that alteration, that change. The language for this can be found in the state statute that's linked here, and then the Charter Commission rule, which we'll talk more about later, is also linked, that provides additional, more detailed information that might be covered in this presentation. So what does an amendment include? Well, it's not for any possible change you would make within a charter school. Obviously, some changes are smaller than others. So the Charter School Commission identifies the amendment is required for a material modification to the charter agreement. And that's any substantive change to the terms of the charter agreement regarding this charter school's governance, financial, operational, or academic structure. And so there are listed in that rule examples of what that might include. And so they include things like a change in the governance structure, including but not limited to a change in the nonprofit entity who governs the school, or an addition of or changes to who acts as the CMO for the charter school. That would warrant an amendment. In addition, if you add or remove a grade level or multiple grade levels, that would require an amendment. Changes in student enrollment, which fall outside of the minimum or maximum enrollment thresholds set forth in your charter agreement. The addition or removal of a plan to provide transportation to students attending the charter school. Changes to the charter school's location, if it will be outside the geographic area that was set forth in your original charter agreement. And then changes to the charter school's academic focus set forth in the charter agreement. Also, there's kind of a catch-all here that if there's any changes that were identified in your charter agreement by you and the authorizer as material modifications, then they would also require an amendment if not listed here. So when we're considering how to submit the application, there are 2 submission windows each school year, fall and spring. So we're currently in the midst of the fall deadline. Anytime you submit an application in these regular windows, you must submit first a letter of intent, which is due 30 days prior to the date of the application. So we are past due for the letter of intent for the fall. It was on September 1st. And the application for those of you who submitted the letter of intent is due by October 1st. There was an asterisk on the prior slide next to grade levels and student enrollment changes, because those can only be submitted during the fall window. They are not able to be submitted during the spring window. For those of you who are still thinking about submitting an application for an amendment this year, the next opportunity to do so will be in the spring. The letter of intent is due on January 15th, and the application is due February 14th. In addition to these two application windows, also written into the rule is an opportunity for an emergency petition. Obviously, example with COVID, we can't always predict everything that will happen despite our best wishes and planning. And so there is written into a rule an opportunity to file a emergency amendment application at any time if good cause exists for the amendment due to unanticipated extraordinary circumstances. So if you're going this route, in addition to selecting the category of amendment that you are submitting, you also need to check the emergency petition, which is at the bottom of the first page in part 1, and briefly describe the circumstances constituting the emergency. An emergency application cannot be used to add grade levels or increase enrollment. And finally, the background statements should include detailed written findings explaining the unanticipated extraordinary circumstances that gave rise to the emergency amendment application. And that's really key, because you might have an amendment that otherwise would have been approved in the fall or spring window, but doesn't meet the threshold for constituting an emergency. And so it could be rejected based on that alone. So you need to explain clearly why this was something that was unanticipated that came up and needs to be addressed through emergency petition. When you are getting ready to submit these documents, again, for non-emergency petitions, so for the fall and spring windows, you'll first submit your letter of intent 30 days prior to the application deadline. There is a template that has been updated. It's posted on the TDOE's website. And so you use that template when you're submitting your letter of intent. Then you'll submit your amendment application. This has also been updated on our website. You'll submit these to the charter.schools@tn.gov email address, and then also whatever your authorizer states as where they want you to submit these documents, also submit them to your authorizer. On page 4 of the guidance document, it provides a thorough checklist of everything that you need to include to be considered a complete amendment application. And so obviously there's the letter of intent, which again, that is not necessary if it's an emergency petition. There's part 1 of the application. You need to fill in all the blanks, check the applicable boxes for the categories that you were asking for an amendment for, and then complete the background statements at the bottom. You'll include your most recent audit balance sheet for the fiscal quarter ending 30 days or more prior to the submission of the application, budgets for the current fiscal year and the 2 succeeding fiscal years, written communications with stakeholders regarding the proposed amendment, minutes of the board meeting approving the amendment with the vote results, and then your signature page. Responses to questions applicable subparts part 2 are also required. So we'll go over that in a little bit, but there's additional questions you'll answer depending on what amendment category you are completing. In that checklist, you'll also note that if you are a school who is currently in your first year operation, a number of these are not required. So from the previous question, if you are in your first year of operation and you're submitting a request for an amendment, and some of these might not be available, and so those are marked for you on page. In addition, the guidance document stipulates the submission requirements, so there is a page limit for this as well. It is 15 pages, but that excludes any attachments to the document. That 15 pages is for part 1 and part 2 if you're submitting an application for a single amendment. If you are submitting an application with multiple amendments, then you can add to your page limit 5 pages for each additional amendment. So if you are submitting one application but talking about 2 amendments, then your page limit would increase to 20 pages. In addition, the guidance document stipulates other items that you need to keep in mind as preparing your application, such as using single-spaced 1-inch margins and 12-point font. Getting into the actual content of the application, part 1 includes just the general information that you'll need to include in your application. This is obviously the name of your school, and then checking the amendment petition category or categories that you are including into your application. Also fill out all required school background information, and then complete in writing the background statements. These cover a couple of topics, such as the amendment details and your rationale for your amendment, how your amendment will support the school's mission and goals, the financial impact of your amendment, how you've engaged your stakeholders as part of your amendment process, the governing board approval process for your amendment, and then if you are submitting an emergency petition, also your explanation of how it meets the threshold for an emergency. And then finally, part one is also where you'll complete and submit your signature page. Part two depends on which amendment or amendments that you are requesting. So these are listed on page 8 of the guidance document, letters A through H. And so you'll use that to find which questions that you need to add in addition to your background statements that you also have already written. And so you'll complete the additional questions for each category selected for your previously, and then attach any additional documents that are required by each subpart. So for example, if you want to add a grade level next year, this would be choice B. So you would go to page 10 and complete those questions. And these questions are catered specifically to that topic. So what is the school's current grade structure? What is the proposed grade structure? You'll add an enrollment table. Those will vary from folks who are looking to change the governance structure or make some other amendment. I will note that one of the categories that is an option on the application is letter H, which is other. And so if something that you want to do is not included anywhere in our list or in your charter agreement, then that last option is an opportunity for schools to check and then provide a brief description of what the category is. And then there are questions for that as well in part two. The timeline for review of these applications is written in statute. So the authorizer must rule on an amendment application within 60 days of the due date, or within 60 days of when it was submitted if it's an emergency application. If the authorizer fails to do this, then it essentially automatically approves the amendment application. If the school's application for amendment is denied, then the school can appeal that decision to the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. We'll talk about more of this in a bit, but that is the biggest change this year in this process is the duties that once were held by the State Board of Education in terms of charter authorizing and appeals have been moved to the Charter School Commission. The rubric that evaluators will use when they're reviewing the application looks like this. It's a bit more simplistic than when you submitted your application to become a charter school in the first place, but you either do not meet or exceed the standards. In order to meet the criteria states, you first have to include responses that thoroughly address all of the key issues. Second, your amendment clearly aligns with the mission and goals of your school. And then third, responses include specific evidence-based information that shows thorough preparation and viability of the plan. So there are a number of components they're looking for, not just that the amendment is warranted, but also is there a clear process that the school has in place to make this plan viable. In addition, in the guidance document, you'll see the rubric includes bullet points in terms of what warrants a strong response. So I advise you to read this carefully and double check your own work and make sure that you're hitting each of these bullets before you submit your application. Some bullets that you'll note, they only apply to certain subparts. So for example, the second one, academic results provide compelling support for the proposed amendment. In parentheses, it says that this is really something they're going to focus on for subparts B, C, F, G, and H. So keep that in mind and make sure that you are hitting all the bullet points for the subparts that you are completing. And also I want to draw your attention to the very last bullet point. Again, there needs to be compelling evidence for why this warrants an emergency petition. Finally, if a situation happens where your application is denied by the authorizer, there is a process for appeal, just like there is when a charter school applies for a new start school. So the authorizer must specify the reasons for denying in writing to the governing body of the charter school within 5 days of their decision. The governing board of the charter school can appeal the decision to the commission within 10 days of the authorizer's decision. And when they do so, they need to include this information. And again, all this is included in the Charter Commission's rule in more detail. But just for you all to know what's going to be expected, a complete appeal includes a copy of the original charter agreement that contains all the material components of the approved application. And that includes any approved, other approved amendments to the original application up to this point. You'll also submit a copy of the amendment application that you submitted to the authorizer. Third, you need a summary of the amendment application timeline. And that essentially includes the date of the amendment application was originally submitted to the authorizer, and then the date that the amendment application was denied by the authorizer. Fourth, you'll need a copy of the letter that was sent informing the governing body of the authorizer's reasons for denying your amendment application. And then finally, a brief statement, no longer than 3 pages, including but not limited to an explanation of why the authorizer's denial of the charter school amendment application was contrary to the best interests of the student, LEA, or community. That last piece is essential because that's essentially how the appeals body decides whether or not they should overturn a decision made by a district. It has to meet the threshold of whether or not the decision was contrary to the best interests of the student's LEA or community. So what is different this year? The biggest things I mentioned before, but the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission is now the appeals body for all charter schools applications and amendment decisions. So they will be who you all work with this year. If you've worked with the state board in the past, it's now the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission for appeals. Please refer to the Charter Commission rule for detailed information regarding the amendment application process, and this includes information on the appeals process. At this time, I will again open it up for any questions you have on the amendment application appeal or appeals.
Nate, there was a question about whether ASD schools complete an annual report, and for those ASD schools listening, yes, that the annual report is required of every charter school.
Thank you, Judy. Other questions? Okay, well, having sat through presentations like this before and then gone back to doing my work, I know that questions always pop up when you least expect it. So my contact information is listed here. I am available by, that's my direct cell phone number there and my email. Please don't hesitate to reach out with questions on anything we discussed today or just in general. Always happy to hop on the phone and connect and answer any questions that you may have. And Judy's also available, but please use me as your first point of contact for charter school related questions. But thank you so much for all of your time today. I know you guys have a busy fall ahead of you. So if there's anything I can do to help you meet the deadline October 1st with your annual report, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you all and have a great day.
And these documents will be posted on our website if anybody needs access to them, and we will also post the recording. Thank you.
Thank you.